Welcome to Britain, a developing country. A series where we visit the movers and shakers in the property development industry to find out what is happening across the UK. Stephen Galpin, one of our resident property experts, is one of the UK's leading property consultants and also a freeman of the City of London.
In this programme we meet Dayan Sujic, the director of the Design Museum in London. Dayan's career has spanned journalism, teaching and writing. Before moving to London, he was director of Glasgow UK City of Architecture and the director of the Venice Architecture Biennial. The Design Museum was first opened in 1989 in a former banana warehouse in Shad Thames. But in November 2016, its current £83 million home in the former Commonwealth Institute opened in Kensington High Street. Before the Design Museum relocated there, however, the interior was transformed by architect John Pawson into a minimalist space of white marble.
Before we get on to the exhibition, tell us a little bit about your move from Docklands to Kensington here.
Well, we've been here in what was once the Commonwealth Institute in Kensington for almost 2 years. Right. 1.2 million people have come to see us since we've been here, which is fantastic. It's all that we dreamed of when we decided to say goodbye to Shad Thames, where we'd been for 25 years, yes. To find somewhere which was bigger, which offered the chance to offer people more, and also gave us the chance to bring a much-loved modern landmark, the Commonwealth Institute, back to life.
You're talking to somebody here that was very proud to have the Design Museum down in Docklands. I used to live there, and in fact I used to work for Terence at one stage. The real key difference seems to be here that you're far more proactive with people, with young people, giving them opportunities here to study and progress their design careers.
Well, I think the whole motivation of Terence Conran starting the museum in the first place was to say that design is not just for people who wear Paul Smith suits, it's for the wider world. It's a way to understand that world. And in Shad Thames, I think we did a good job of trying to get that message across. But in the end, we were quite small. We were about 30,000 square feet. We had about 150,000 people a year came to see us, which was great. But we thought, in the same way that Tate Modern made contemporary art not something that was seen as being weird by the tabloid press, but was something which was part of everyday life, we thought we could do something like that for design and architecture, which is why we needed somewhere bigger, somewhere we could actually offer much more to people.
But let's move on now to the young people that you're assisting here. What sort of opportunities would a young designer have in association with the museum?
Well, we have a whole range of programs. So for schools, we do a project called Design Ventura. It's funded by Deutsche Bank, and every year we challenge schools throughout the UK to put forward teams of their students to respond to the challenge of designing a brief for a product that we put out, which the winning project is actually manufactured and sold in our shops. And the young people get to spend their royalties on the charity of their choice, which is a great way to reach young people who might not even necessarily be designers themselves one day, but to actually show them how to work in teams, how to consider the basic problems of making things for need. We do a master's program for young curators of design. Upstairs we have a studio where every year we identify 4 recent graduates from design schools who have already achieved something, but at that difficult stage in their careers where they're looking for what to do next, how to actually learn how to operate. So we give them a bursary, we give them studio space, we give them mentoring and an exhibition of their work at the end of the process.
Right, I just think the mentoring is very important. It's their step into the world of design, isn't it, really?
I think people learn by doing and learn by those who have experience of going through those problems themselves.
With such an array of exhibits and much of the museum open to the public without charge, how does the museum find enough financial support to get its funding year on year?
Bigger and more opportunity usually spells more costs, so how does the Design Museum cope with the funding?
Well, we're a private charity, so we have to make sure that the building is designed in such a way that we can support ourselves as much as possible. So We offer free admission to the top floor where we have our collection, but we do need to charge for our temporary exhibitions. We have 2 shops, a restaurant, a cafe. We have fundraising, so we've got multiple income sources.
Right. And tell me, there was talk of a flagpole scheme where people were sponsoring the flagpoles. Was that?
Well, that's absolutely right. One of our trustees, Charles Rifkin, had the brilliant idea of people who wanted to make a contribution could stump up 25 grand and put their name to a flagpole, and they get to come for a dinner at the museum once a year.
And that worked well.
It was one of the many things that worked really well, yes. In the end, we raised £50 million to make the move to construct the building and pay for the project costs, and of that, some came from selling our former building in Chad Thames, which Terence Conran very generously gave us. We got £8 million from various lottery funds, and the rest was a series of private donations.
And was there not some connection with the 106 agreements for apartments close to the development?
When we were looking for a new home, we looked at a lot of sites. We considered going back to our original base, which was inside the Victoria and Albert Museum. We looked at Potter's Field, just by Tower Bridge. And then finally, Kensington Chelsea Council contacted us about the long-running problem of what to do about the former Commonwealth Institute, a grade 2-star listed landmark that couldn't be demolished, but which had been empty for 2 decades, which had been acquired by a property company, Chelsfield, who wanted to build some apartments around it. And the council said, well, to save the landmark building, we will allow planning permission for the apartments, but the landmark building needs to go to a charity which can use it as a museum again.
The museum's occasional exhibitions are often designed to provoke thought and comment. The Home Futures exhibition, for instance, takes a look at ideas of the past which have become part of our current lifestyle, while introducing concepts which may well become part of our future.
So let's move on now to the current exhibition, which is Home Futures. Tell us a little bit about that.
As everyone knows, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. There's for so many reasons, housing has become unaffordable for so many people. Partly it's because of the kind of the turn against social housing, partly it's against price inflation, partly it's that we're not building enough new homes. But this show is actually not about housing and about quantities, it's about the idea of the home, which is about qualities as well. And museums, I think, have been rather remiss in thinking about what home life might be like. There were some great shows in the past. Back in the 1950s, the Whitechapel Gallery did a great show called This Is Tomorrow. But really for 25 years, at a time of massive change in the way that we live, people haven't really thought about it. So Home Futures is asking those questions about what's happened to the idea of privacy, what does technology in the home mean, where's the difference between working and living at home.
Presumably, looking back over the last decades, designers, architects in those periods had perception of what they would think we're going to have and what we're going to enjoy or otherwise in this decade. How does that show itself in the exhibition?
Well, we've looked back at some dreams from the past. So there's a 1956 ideal home of the future, which involves fiberglass furniture and ovens that disappear into the floor. We've got robot kitchen cleaners from the 50s. And strangely, some of the things really have happened. There is now something called artificial intelligence, which will clean your home for you. But of course, I mean, it's interesting how we see things differently from different perspectives. There was a time when the 60s was seen as being wonderful and a shiny new future. Then in the 80s, we saw some of those shiny new futures had turned into rather dystopian visions or realities. And it's fascinating now that I think we've gone back to seeing brutalism in the 1960s as somehow a bold ambition. We've gone, there are now tours of London's concrete housing developments. Yes. And it's in the same way that Victoriana suddenly went from being seen as a hideous joke to priceless heritage. We see the 60s in that way as well.
The idea of standalone or connectable modules, for instance, could be considered to be quite strange in Kensington, but not so much in towns or cities that have been severely damaged by floods, earthquakes, or even war. Other ideas, such as sleeping spaces as opposed to beds, are not so hard to imagine.
I mean, it's quite interesting at the Design Museum. I mean, your normal exhibitions will feature everything from futuristic electric kettles to robot hoovers to bicycles and even cars. Do you think the aspirations, the thoughts, the ambitions of those times in the 60s and 70s have in general carried forward, or do you think we are really just a more basic society today?
Every generation turns against its parents sooner or later, and then maybe reflects again. So I think we are now seeing the recent past in different terms. But no, I think that we have gone through a decade of quite extraordinary change. If you think about it, Steve Jobs only launched the first smartphone 11 years ago.
11 years, yes.
And even he, I don't think, would have predicted just how much that's changed everything from the way that we live or navigate a city to the way that we meet each other. Without the smartphone, there will be no Tinder. Without the smartphone, there will be no Uber. And these things have had absolutely massive changes on the way that we live and the way that we meet each other and the way that home works.
How do you plan, how do you foresee or project the interest in the exhibitions that you create? What's the sort of time frame from the germ of an idea to putting on an exhibition? Is it 1 year, 2 years? Do you have difficulty getting participants? Is it hard work doing that?
Well, it's enormously stimulating and challenging and fun. The team here works very hard on our programs, which do take shape over 2 to 3, even 4 years sometimes. And that's what allows you to do the research, to find the unique objects, to tell the stories with images, with pictures, with things. In some ways, the museum is like a theatre in that our galleries aren't like an art gallery in which they are permanent fixed spaces. We make very elaborate sets, we try and immerse people. And Design Museum for me is, it's got a fascinating future because it is a place to come, to have a shared social experience, somewhere to switch off your computer, meet people and see things.
Okay. Well, look, Dan Sudic, thank you so much for your time. Property TV is very grateful for the invitation. We've really enjoyed coming here, and you really are to be complimented on the exhibition and the spaces around. Thank you so much.
Come back soon.
After the break, we're going to take a look at a unique and stunning design concept that could revolutionise our transportation system in London and perhaps all over the world. Before the break, we met Dan Sudic, the director of the London Design Museum, and took a specific look at the museum's latest exhibition, the Home Futures exhibition. Like most cities in the world, London has grown from a small ancient settlement on the banks of a river, providing mankind's basic need for water. As time progressed, rivers such as the Thames became a key to easy travel to other villages and towns, and for the transportation of goods for trade. The 19th and 20th centuries, however, saw a significant change in the use of waterways, with more and more trade and personal travel moving to the railways and rapidly developing road systems. Perhaps it's time for that to change again. David Morley, of David Morley Architects, has been working on an innovative and surprisingly practical plan to return our focus to the water.
David, your idea of having river taxis and the utilisation of the Thames, marvellous idea. Tell us all about it.
Well, for a long time I've been passionate about what to do about London's congested streets. And one rather overlooked asset we have in London is the River Thames. If you think back, London's been built around the River Thames as a focal point. For the last 2,000 years, it's been a focus for culture and commerce and indeed transportation, up until late 18th century when it got polluted. Trains came, buses came, and it's been somewhat neglected ever since. And there's a real opportunity now. It's all cleaned up. The streets are horribly congested. Why can't we look at it again as a way of introducing some fantastic personalised transport? We've got buses, Thames Clippers at the moment, yes, but now's the time to introduce the idea of a taxi.
Okay, well, just looking at the history a little bit, we have had introduced over the last few years a requirement for construction sites, for instance, to use the Thames to take in materials and take away waste as much as they possibly can. And as you just mentioned, we had the advent of the river buses, or the Clippers as they're called. their initiation wasn't easy. I think it took a couple of goes to get the service right, but it does seem quite successful now. And that's a good use of the Thames, isn't it?
I think so. I think the idea of travelling along the river is something which is efficient because you don't get held up in traffic jams, but it's also uplifting because you get a perspective of London that you don't get when you travel along more confined spaces and streets.
Absolutely, yeah. So your taxi is a rather more individual service.
That's right. So the thing with the Thames Clipper, if you were going from Putney to Canary Wharf, then you would need to stop 5 or 6 times on the way. Whereas the taxi idea, you can dial up your destination, exactly where you want to go to, and get taken there non-stop in your own privacy and comfort.
Okay. Now, tell us a little bit about the river taxi itself. How's it going to look?
Yeah. Well, we've collaborated with Nick Bailey Design, and he was responsible for the part of the team that developed the pods for the London Eye, which you'd be familiar with, and he's designed some wonderful yachts. He's also an architect, and we've looked at the emerging electronic technologies. I think EasyJet in the next 10 years will be bringing out a commuter plane, which is completely electric. So the technology is there to do something which is electrically powered, a small cab which is lifted up on hydrofoils. I don't know if you've seen the America's Cup, but if you can see how boats are transformed. When they lift out of the water, all of the resistance goes and they move incredibly efficiently. And if we do that, we've got a double benefit. We can have a very efficient means of transportation and it creates no wake. And that's a big issue with the rivers.
It is indeed, yes.
To prevent that. And so
you've got degradation of banks and things if you have wake. Yeah.
And so the idea is to create something rather the size of a London taxi. So it's got 6 seats. We envisage that one of those seats will be for a driver initially, but as time evolves, we envisage these will become driverless when the driverless concept becomes very much proven on the roads.
So I presume then that with this design of taxi, then it's not going to be so susceptible to bad weather.
Absolutely critical. London, the river is totally different from Venice. So we're not going around in an open-topped gondola. This is an encapsulated vehicle. So you'll be protected from the river, from the weather when you're inside. Big areas of glass with very good visibility through, so you can enjoy the view and the experience. And then it's also very important to design a docking station, and we've got a concept for that which will allow you to get on board through the rear of the cab, and the dock will hold the cab steady, so it won't be going up and down in waves when you get on board.
Now, you've mentioned the docks, coming to the docks. How many do you envisage and what sort of spread of area?
Well, we think we can go from just upstream from Putney right the way down to Docklands and beyond. And we've so far looked at about 50 sites, and there's also the possibility of linking into existing jetties as well.
Okay, but I know one of your concept ideas is to actually develop the space above the dock.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people have looked at putting things in the Thames for a long time now, and if the right decision's been made, a little way back, we could have had an airport as an island in the Thames.
True.
And the Royal Fine Arts Commission in the 1990s, they looked at putting islands in the River Thames. It's a very wide river, so you've got plenty of space there to exploit. So the idea is the jetties would sit on piles, which would be anchored into the riverbed.
Right.
And then they would, the launching jetty would float up and down with the tide. But then above that, you've got an opportunity to develop something. So sensitive areas, it might be something single story, it might be a restaurant, it might be a club, it might be a swimming pool, tennis court, leisure facility. But there are other areas where you can actually build up above multi-story structures, which could be live-work units, they could be
restaurants,
cultural
hotels.
Real opportunity for some commercial development, which could then feed into the funding of the infrastructure.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Where do you see the funding coming from on this? Is it from the construction on the pods?
Clearly there's a commercial business case for the taxis themselves, but also this would be an important part of the funding is to look at the commercial development opportunities.
How are you going to coordinate the finishing of these pods and getting the service in place? Are you going to have a limited number of stops to start with, or are you going to wait until everything's in place?
I think we need to get a critical mass going so that you can get round a reasonable spread of London to offer the service initially, and then I hope it will then build on that once it gets firmly established.
Okay. And how many river taxis do you envisage in operation at any one time?
Well, I think there's a huge capacity, and so I haven't got an exact figure for you yet. But what I can say is that the Port of London Authority have a plan for the River Thames, for a vision for 2035. So they see the capacity for the river traffic to double from what it is currently. And so they haven't got taxis on the agenda yet, but taxis could very much be part of that.
How do the Port of London Authority measure traffic? What sort of traffic do they measure? Is it pleasure boats? Is it cargo boats?
It's all of that. And you mentioned construction traffic, and we've developed a site ourselves where all of the waste's gone out through barges onto the river, and it's a very efficient way of doing it. So it's a blend. And I think taxis will be an important part of that mix.
Okay. And coming back to the operations then, how do you envisage hailing one of these taxis? Just on your iPhone or?
Well, very much so. I think people are getting used to that now. But the beauty of this one is that you can guarantee once you're on board when you're going to arrive, because there's no chance of getting held up in traffic. And so you can put at your price point, you can fix it, so you're not going to be paying for sitting in a traffic jam. How frustrating is that?
Yeah.
And so it can all be automated, and to make it, it's all about convenience and comfort. And right the way from the hailing of the taxi through to the docking station, it will be glazed, a bit like the Jubilee line where you have glass doors that open up, so you're all protected from the weather.
Yes. Okay, and David, $1 million question, when?
Well, I think that this is an idea that is going to happen, and I want to make sure that our scheme is the one that happens.
Of course.
Somebody doesn't nick the idea. And so we're hoping to get detailed plans in place during the course of next year. We've got a lot of consultation to do with a lot of stakeholders. I would hope that we'd have prototypes running within the next 5 years, and within the next 10 years, an operational scheme.
Are we going to be seeing a prototype in the Design Museum here shortly?
Well, that would be marvellous, wouldn't it? I mean, I think the design we've evolved, because it's dealing with the very specifics of the River Thames, is going to be quite unique, and I very much hope it'll become an icon for London, a bit like the London bus has.
Okay. David, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It may seem very futuristic today, but so did railways, cars, and travel by air, until the benefits were fully seen and someone decided to make it happen. Perhaps the future is not as far away as we may think.